Hey guys, welcome back to the Python for Anxious Artists series. And in this lesson, we'll be talking about functions. We'll be talking about what are they, what makes them important, why should you even care about them, and also we'll go into how to use functions for your code. So without further ado, let's jump into the lesson. So before we jump into how to use functions, let's talk about what are functions. Well, functions are convenient methods of dividing your code into smaller usable chunks. And you'll see that in many programming languages, a lot of things that we introduce, from variables to functions to classes, it's all about making your code more manageable. So how do functions make your code more manageable? Well, firstly, it allows programmers to make our code more readable by breaking it up into smaller chunks. So you don't have to see long lines of code, and that's really important. It also gives us an opportunity to name a specific block of code a good name. So it abstracts that meaning for what the code is doing underneath it. And think about it, it's almost like a comment there. A function should tell exactly what it's doing underneath the hood without having to delve into it to take a look at it. The second thing that functions do is it allows code to be reusable. And so when you have code that is reusable, it saves time in so many ways. It saves time in making sure that you don't have to copy and paste code all over the place, but it also saves time when you have to change a code at one particular place and you don't have to change it all over your code. So functions help us adhere to the concept called dry, and it's a principle of coding that stands for don't repeat yourself. And that came about from Andy Hunt and Dave Thomas's book called The Pragmatic Programmer. The gist of it is avoid repeating the same or similar code across your program. It reduces the number of errors that can occur when you forget to change some parts of your code. So check out The Pragmatic Programmer, your journey to master. If you have not seen it before, there's a lot of great advice in there about how to approach coding like being a master craftsman. So let's go into how to create functions. Alright, so how do we use functions? We've actually dealt with and used functions plenty of times now. The print function, the len function, even int and dir are all functions. They're just inbuilt functions that we have used, and they just come with Python. They come with the Python standard library, and we didn't need to define them. So now let's learn how to create, or otherwise known as define, our own custom functions. At its simplest, a function is simply defined with a def keyword, which stands for define. And so this is a special reserved keyword. You don't name your variables or your functions with def as def. We give it a name that adheres to the PEP8 naming convention. If you don't remember, do check out the PEP8 naming conventions for functions and variable names. In this case, we tend to demarcate readability using an underscore, and we keep everything lowercase. I like to name my functions beginning with adjectives or verbs or action words that describe what they're actually doing. So in this simple example, I'm going to say calculate area. So very intuitively, I know this is a function that calculates area. We also have these two curly brackets, open and close. We will talk about them in more detail later, why it's in there. And then we ended off with a semicolon. So this in itself defines a function. We then indent the function, so we go like 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. and we now are able to place some logical lines of code in there. In this example, if we are just kind of stubbing out functions, so sometimes we would create a function but we're not ready to populate it with anything yet, we would put a pass keyword in there, and that's something that you would see very often and quite common when coding. And all this does is simply say there's nothing to do, move along after this line. But it's really useful for stubbing out functions that we will fill out later. Now that we have our calculate area function, let's try calling it. And we can call it pretty easily by using the term calc area, open and close bracket. And just running this will call our function, although it won't do anything. So what I want to do is maybe print the result of the function. All right, so I passed a function into a function, if you think about it. And I'm telling it to pass the return, whatever is the result of calculate area, into print. So let's run it and see what we get. As expected, we get nothing, a none, because our function is not doing anything at the moment. So let's go ahead and define something. Let's guide it to return 10 times 20. So let's run our function again and see the results. You see that it now returns 200 because calculate area returns the result of 10 times 20. And it prints us the result of that, which is 200. So in this example, the return keyword allows a function to output some sort of data or value. Again, it is a keyword and it's a reserved keyword, so we don't name our variables or our functions return because it holds a special meaning to Python. We can also simply call our function by using the function name with the circular brackets. Finally, we've also seen that we can pass a function into yet another function, and whatever result it returns gets passed on to that function. Now, that gives us a clue as to why these circular brackets are important. Alright, so let's now talk a little bit about variable scopes. Python variables have a scope. So in other words, they have boundaries or limits where they exist. And variables created within blocks of code, like functions, are called local variables. They exist only within the block of code in the function. So let's go ahead and define a local variable within our calculate area function. Instead of returning 10 times 20, I'm going to define a variable called area and say that is 10 times 20. Now, instead of returning 10 times 20, I'm going to return area instead. Right? And now I'm going to run my code once more. And we can see that I have the same result, 200. The result is the same, but what I have done is I have created a variable called area that accepts the result of 10 times 20, which is 200, and I'm returning the value of area back. Now, this area variable only exists within the scope or the boundaries of this calculate area function. So if I were to try to print area, let's take a look at what happens. You'd find that I get a traceback and it says name error, the name area is not defined. This is once again because we created and defined our area variable within the calculate area function. So it ceases to exist outside of the scope of this function. Wow, we covered quite a lot of scope here today. Well, pun intended. In this video, we talked about what functions are, why should you care about them, and we've also shown you how to use them and how to call them. And we also talked about variable scopes, in creating variables within functions and where they are visible and not visible to the program, right? If you like this kind of stuff, remember to subscribe to the channel. Remember to also check out all the other videos in the Python for Anxious Artists series. My name is Nelson Lim, and I'm here to help CG practitioners create more, earn more, and live more. And I'll see you in the next video.